Good morning, everyone. My name is Neera Tanden. I'm president of the Center for American Progress Action Fund. It's my great honor to welcome Reverend Al Sharpton here. We'll have a great discussion. But first, he'll start off with some remarks, which I know we're all anxious to hear. Over the last year, our nation's conscience has been shaken by many senseless deaths and actions of real police brutality. Names like Eric Garner, Walter Scott, Tamir Rice, Dontre Williams are all cases we've heard. We've seen these instances from social media and other issues that have really brought this attention, this struggle, to the light. But over many years, we've also seen other cases like Abner Louima, Amadou Diallo, Patrick Dorsmond, cases of police brutality and really actions of police violence back in the 90s, earlier this decade, in the 80s. So these issues are not new, and we're really honored to have Reverend Sharpton here, who has been leading in an effort to really not just prick the conscience of the nation, but demonstrate to the nation what our African American brother and sisters are seeing. But it's important that we recognize that it's not just these issues, it's not just police brutality that are important in this election. That we have issues of the everyday disparities that are affecting communities of color. Disparities from the criminal justice system, education, healthcare. These gaps that are still looming large in our country that actually really hold all of us back. Truthfully, the United States is a country that is becoming more diverse, and as we do so, those disparities ensure that we are all worse off. In a country that becomes majority people of color, if we have real economic, healthcare, education disparities, it's really against, and it works against the economic interests of all of us. So it's really important, and this is an argument we make here at the Center for American Progress all the time. So it is an election cycle. We have important elections and the primaries coming up. On Saturday, there will be the South Carolina debate. The South Carolina vote, but many states loom across the country. Issues of concern to African Americans and people of color are looming larger and larger in the debate, and that is a vital thing. So I know we all look forward to hearing Reverend Sharpton's views on these topics. He's a longtime civil rights champion, a progressive leader in the country, founder and leader of the National Action Network, a civil rights group with offices around the country. He has a daily media presence, has his own show, but also speaks to so many issues of concern to the country, and we are honored to have him here.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy and honored to be here and honored to share with you my thoughts as well as to engage in some conversation. Let me pick up where Neera left off. I think that as we are approaching the election the primary election for a Democratic nominee in South Carolina this weekend, and then both parties at Super Tuesday, we are going to begin to see the presence of people of color in big numbers at the polls. The question is what they go to the polls, what impact it will have, not only on the elections, but on the future of the country and on their communities. What has been very, very alarming to many of us in the civil rights community is that the concerns of people of color have been largely ignored until it becomes time to go and ask for their vote. So everybody shows up 2 weeks out, goes to the church, learns how to sing Amazing Grace, act like they have rhythm for an hour, and gone. and not to be heard from again until the next election cycle. So what many of us opted to do was say we're not going to play that game and we're not going to dance with you in that waltz this time. We want to discuss everything from police reform to economic disparities to the entire criminal justice system, mass incarceration, to environmental racism, i.e. Flint, Michigan, and across the board, including the very basic issue of voting rights. What one of the ironies of this election cycle to me is that voting rights has not even come up in the Republican debates, and only in passing in some of the Democratic debates, yet you're appealing to people to vote for you without dealing with the impediments of those very same people that are facing to even cast their vote. 15 states that will be voting in this presidential election have new laws about voting that they never had before. 15 states. And we're discussing the black vote like they're not major impediments in many states that will impair the black vote. Now, I remember in 2012, many of us engaged, National Action Network was one of the groups taking the lead on this, about fighting the new voter ID laws and fighting the new laws to bring back or cut back on early voting days and Sunday voting days, which we had all called Sunday sold to the polls. And when we began mobilizing around that after the Supreme Court had gutted a major section of preclearance, or at least the map for preclearance out of the Voting Rights Act, we began to mobilize people, and people were angry at their vote being robbed and their vote being messed with. And that contributed in many ways to the turnout and the long lines that you saw in Ohio, in Florida, and around the country. I was on the ground in Ohio and Florida around that time. And I talked to people on those lines who told me that I'm here, Reverend Al, yes, I'm supporting President Obama's reelection, but I'll stay here all night before I allow them to take my vote. Well, this is a more clear and present danger this cycle, but the candidates are not even talking about it. We've reduced the campaigns to personality contests, like we're running for most popular in school, rather than policy and the direction of the country. And when you feed into personality politics, the result is you produce a Donald Trump, because then you're dealing with who's more colorful and entertaining than who's in your interest. So then the debate becomes who has the best soundbite or the best attack or the best line on your opponent, rather than who will deal with voting rights and who will deal with economic interests and who will deal with criminal justice and who will deal with health care. And I think that we've become prisoners of our own reality TV kind of culture now, where we're looking for the reality show with the best train wreck to entertain us before we go to bed and have nightmares and wonder where they came from. It, in my judgment, is the challenge of those that are serious about the direction of the country to have a sober analysis of where we are and a sobering of the electorate to get out of and refrain from this kind of worship of personality. Even on the Democratic side, do you like Bernie or do you like Hillary, as opposed to discussing their policies in these areas that I've talked about and their trust factor based on their backgrounds and track record on who will deliver and who will not, and who has a practical way of getting that done. We also have a particular point in history. There are two things that I want to raise on that. One, January 20th of next year, January 20th, 2017, in this city, we will face something that we've never seen in American history before. This will be the first time that a white will succeed a black president. We've never been there before. How America responds to that, we don't know. How black America will respond to that, we don't know. I was at the White House last night for the Ray Charles event. Last week we had a meeting, intergenerational civil rights leaders with President Obama. And as we were coming out of that meeting, one of my colleagues, who I won't name since there's press here, said to me, Remal, we stayed an hour and a half. We were only supposed to be in for an hour. We stayed an extra half hour because we don't know if we'll be invited to Black History Month next year this time. I said, we don't even know if there'll be a Black History Month in the White House next year this time. I don't think that we've locked in that the sense of outrage that many of us have around some of the situations Neera outlined will even be more intensified when we see that black family walk out of the White House and head to Marine One for the last time and head to wherever they seek to go when they leave the White House. But as important is, which way will the ship of state go? With all of the critiques of Barack Obama came in after 23 years of the ship of state going one way. We had Reagan 8 years, Bush Sr. going one direction, Clinton, who triangulated and kind of tipped it a little to the center, but was sort of midway, and then we go through 8 years of Bush. Obama turned back around this whole idea of government not being involved, government not confronting states' rights, whether it was on immigration, whether it was on criminal justice with Holder and then Loretta Lynch, this whole issue of criminal justice. In terms of the big picture of which way government was going, Barack Obama's administration turned it around in terms of a direction of going back toward government securing and protecting the rights of all citizens, not leaving it to the states. Well, we tend to now have the ship turned back all the way right. And if Trump is elected, I don't even know which way that means. And neither does anyone else. A lot of Trump's people say they're just mad and want to see something different. So I think that in that climate, the black vote and the Latino vote become critical. Because in the states that are going to decide the nomination and the general election, critical states like Florida, like Ohio, like Pennsylvania, like Michigan, all of those states have critical blocks of black and Latino voters. The question is whether they come out to vote and whether they stay on long lines to vote, given the impediments to voting. So you've got to not only register them, you've got to inspire them. Before you can turn people out, you've got to turn them on. And unless we get past personality cult politics and deal with the policies that mean something to people every day, the turnout and the turn on will not happen. Now, Neera's right. I do talk radio every day, 3 hours a day. A lot of my list, every State of the Union I'm on in and every region of the country. I get callers every day, young and old. One of the reasons that I and National Action Network are so involved is because I talk to people. A lot of people talk for people they never talk to. A lot of people leading folk they don't even like. I talk to people every day on the air. That's why people can tell me whatever they want to tell me. I get on the air the next day, run it to my audience, and let the feedback tell me many times stunning to me, because I go with certain assumptions that end up not being the flavor. Now, I'm not saying talk radio gives you the flavor of everybody, but it gives you a pulse, because the average person that listens and engages in talk radio will vote because they're involved. And when I get a lot of the response from people every day, then as I tour, I'm preaching tonight in Miami, on my way from there to L.A., as I talk to people in churches, as I talk to people in the street, as I talk to people on college campuses, people are saying that I'm not hearing things that mean something to me personally. I'm not a political junkie. I'm not that involved. So why should I go and risk standing in line 5 hours? I might go to vote, but if they say my ID was in question or I moved or they can't find my card, what is it in it for me? I wanted to make a statement with Barack Obama. I wanted to be there to elect the first black president. I wanted to be there to turn the country around. But what is in it for me? That's the challenge of this election. And I'm so happy Neera said what she did, that it is not just one issue. Certainly, a lot of what we've done has been around police reform. But police reform is one of many, and a lot of the police community stuff emanates from other economic and environmental and social ills. When the first of the cases of this last wave was the Eric Garner case in New York, where a man was choked to death on video saying, "I can't breathe." This was July of 2014. I was in Nevada on a voting rights tour when Eric Garner's wife contacted us the day he was killed and asked us to be involved. Like most public media, we never get involved in cases. I'm talking now as an organization, National Action Network, and the head of our Washington Bureau is sitting here, Ebony Riley, and stand up, Ebony. And Faith Blackburn that handles our work interface with Congress and all. When we got the call from the Garners, I left Nevada the next day. He was killed on a Thursday. Had them at our rally every Saturday morning. We have a rally in Harlem, live on the radio. 200 people there, 200 to 300 there, thousands listening live every Saturday morning. No matter where I am, I'm back in Harlem on Saturday mornings. Because again, I believe you can't have a movement unless you're on the ground with regular folk every Saturday. I remember when I started the MSNBC show, people say, "You ain't gonna do this no more." Every Saturday I'm there. And we had the family there, and we went from there to Staten Island, had the first marches, first rallies. I ended up doing Eric Garner's funeral, did the eulogy and all. While we were fighting the Garner case 3 weeks later, I get a call from a man who said they killed my son, my grandson, in Ferguson. So I'm in the middle of the Garner case when Ferguson happened, flew there, did the first rallies. All of this in the context of we were still fighting voting rights, in the context of we were still fighting to maintain the Affordable Care Act, in the context of still dealing with the fact that late 2014, while we were preparing the march here in Washington around jurisdictional threshold of civil rights violation cases, Reverend Charles Williams, a young man in his early 30s that heads our chapter of National Action Network in Michigan, started coming on my radio show talking about lead poisoning in the water in Flint, all at the same time, which is why we cannot reduce this to a one-issue problem, because then the suggestion is, well, let's put a Band-Aid here rather than deal with a systemic problem of inequality in this country. So it is in that context that we met with Senator Sanders and with former Secretary Clinton to say the issue is not who we are going to support. The issue is who's going to support us and who's going to address the systemic inequality and who's going to deal with what Holder and Loretta Lynch have began in terms of the criminal justice reform, and who's going to continue to deal with issues like Flint. Where are we on the substantive issues? And I think that that is going to be a deciding factor in this election. Can Trump be stopped if he's the nominee, or the right wing be stopped? It's according to who shows up to stop them. And it's according to how long they stay and they're committed. And I think the challenge is that people must feel that the election is not about Trump or Cruz or Rubio or Hillary or Bernie, but that it's about them. It's about us. It's about, I'm going to stand up for my children. And that is what the fight must be about. Otherwise, I think we're going to have an election based on who could draw the most fans rather than who can convince the most voters. It's easy in an age of technology now. I always talk, we have a lot of young people. Most of the leadership in National Action Network, in fact, I would say 85% of our chapter leaders are under 40. And I tease them all the time that don't confuse getting likes on Facebook or on Twitter with that you have to be liked to be a social or civil rights activist. I think we're in a likes generation. Drive up my numbers rather than change the paradigm. And I check my likes every day too. I'm gonna check as soon as it's over. Y'all live streaming. So I'm not down on you, but I'm also admonishing all of us, including me, to let's stand for something. Otherwise, we're about to lose it all. History should not record that after 8 years of the first African-American president who began changing the course of this country, that it was just a comma in a continual paradigm of inequality and ignoring systemic racism, rather than a statement that is now continued with a different path. And I think that is, in my opinion, the challenge of the 2016 election. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Ooh, sorry. Thank you so much for those fantastic remarks. I guess I wanted to just start off by asking you, on the Democratic side, you have two candidates who are talking about issues of systemic racism. They're talking about their own privileges as white people. Do you see that as, what progress do you see that as? And do you think that they have, having an African-American president has allowed the conversation to shift in that direction?
Well, I think that it is good that it is being discussed. What I have said to both of them is that it took a lot, including having an African-American president, including pressure from civil rights groups to get them to talk about that like that. But it's like I put it this way: they've gotten to the whereas there's systemic racism, but I want to hear more of the therefore this is what I'm going to do about it. So it's good that you say, yes, the country has an illness. Now how are we going to heal it specifically, not slogans? I don't need people to just tell me, yep, y'all are right, it's unfair. Okay, tell me what you're going to do about it. I'll give you an example. When I was meeting with Senator Sanders, and I said to him, I agree with you on everything you're saying about campaign finance, Wall Street and all. But if we straighten all that out, blacks would still be unequal. If you close the big banks, that's not going to deal with the race gap in your economics solutions. Why aren't we hearing about things like affirmative action and guarantees and contracts and all? Is that going to offend some of your base? Same thing with Mrs. Clinton. We hear you say that you disagree with some of the things done in the 90s under your husband with the criminal omnibus crime bill, which I opposed at that time. And she know I got into a big conflict with them. But then what would you do with a Justice Department? What kind of Attorney General would you have? So I want to hear more whereas than therefore.
Just moving away from politics for a minute, I know you're going to Los Angeles. We have the Oscars happening on Sunday. It's another arena in which we were talking about essentially prejudice in the culture. What's your sense of the debate and discussion we're having, and what's your message to Hollywood?
I think, again, it's taken too long. Last year, they top 20 nominations, all white. Many of us raised issues about it. They said to specifically National Urban League, National Action Network, and others of us that were involved, we will deal with it. We said fine. They didn't. A few months later, the chairman of the board of Sony, it was revealed emails where she made some very racially insensitive, really offensive statements about the president.
Racist statements.
She flew to New York, met with me and Morial and NAACP. The heads of the film industry, we'll deal with it. You're right, it's all white. I said then that the movie industry was like the Rocky Mountains. The higher up you get, the whiter it is. Never heard no more once they got past that. So we've had enough. So we are going, I'll be there Sunday outside with others that will be raising the issue of diversity. We're going to start meeting with advertisers who couldn't get out of their contracts this year, saying that we do not want you to advertise again at the Oscars if there is not diversity in the Academy, and we start dealing with these Hollywood movie companies before the next year. We're going to put them on notice starting Sunday. We're going to announce that, which I just preempted the announcement, so I might be out of the coalition by the night, but that's why I'm going to Los Angeles.
And what do you see as the problem there? Is it that it's the Academy is basically mostly white and male, and they pick their own members? Is it studios? I mean, it's interesting because in so many ways, media companies are recognizing they have to reach out to more diverse audiences with some of the news products that are coming out today, but yet there's this resistance at the studio level.
Well, I think that, it becomes, one of the unspoken problems in this country when we deal with race is we dealt much more with racism in the South than we did in the North. One of the reasons why somebody like me became so controversial is how dare you call Northern liberals in New York and Hollywood racist. We're not racist. We just know how to handle your problems better than you do. We're paternalistic racist. You really don't know how to do. We know how to do. So we can project you better. We can decide for you better. And when you want to decide for yourself, then you become a bunch of names that we will put in our liberal papers. And I think that's what Hollywood was always able to have the image of progressivism.
Yeah.
Until you look back and say, but why is it all white making the decisions? When you look at the fact that the bulk of any number of studies has it somewhere between 40 and 50% of theater goers are black and Latino. And you don't have a black in Hollywood that can pull the trigger on a movie, and nobody in Hollywood even recognized that or even saw that. How liberal is that? So we go out there to raise progressive money from some people that have exclusionary business practices. So it's almost like, I will support you marching down south against Archie Bunker, but don't move on my block. And I think that's the kind of problem that we have to do. And we've had to deal with in the New Yorks and Chicagos, et cetera, for a long time.
I wanted to also turn to a current debate we're having here in Washington, which is about the Supreme Court. I mean, we are facing something that's literally never happened in our history, which is a president is being told essentially not to even nominate someone. I think a lot of people think that is happening, that's really only happening and would only happen to President Obama. Do you see any racial charge to this debate at all, or do you see it as
I think that first of all we're on the brink of a constitutional crisis, and it is unheard of when you have senators saying we won't even meet with who's nominated. Let's known have a hearing and a vote. We're not even going to talk to them. So, in effect, what they're saying is that the president of the United States is not the president. Where I see the racial angle, and I said when we left the White House last week after meeting with him, I felt he has been profiled from the beginning as he's not the real president. We're just going to act like it didn't happen. He's not the real president. Starting with, he's not really American. Prove you're one. You're not really one of us. The subliminal message there is even if he has a birth certificate, he's not us. And therefore, you can't believe what they say anyway. Who can believe the birth certificate? You know they lie. I mean, that's really what they're saying. All the way to now, well, you're no longer president. He's president till January 20th of 2017. Clear in the Constitution that he makes appointments until then. You have the right to advise and consent. You had the right to vote. You don't have the right to tell them don't nominate. And then you proceed any other way that you proceeded any other time in history. And the fact that they're not doing it clearly has racial implications to me. But it should concern all Americans whether they think it's racial or not.
For sure. I wanted to turn back to issues of police brutality, and I think these issues have really pricked the consciousness of the country this year. But New York is a great example of a city that has had challenges for a very long time. A northern city that has had challenges for a very long time. I mean, I started doing politics in New York in the late '90s, and we were dealing. Obviously, have the case of Eric Garner this year, but Patrick Dorsman, Amadou Diallo. Then it was also very politically charged in the ways it is today. You had Rudy Giuliani as mayor, heavily defending the police, attacking people who are raising issues, attacking you personally for raising these issues. How do you see what progress we've made or what little progress we've made in the last 15 years on these issues?
I think that we've seen some little progress and some going backwards. In the 90s, as you recounted, when we had built this large, in fact, National Action Network started in the 90s. And when we had a large protest movement, even under Giuliani, we were able to get the federal government to come in and prosecute. And Abner Louima, we put police in jail. One of those policemen is still in jail this morning because the federal government. So December of 2014, when we had the big march here around jurisdictional threshold, saying that we must lower the threshold, it was because we knew that unless we could bring in the federal government more in police cases, we would lose prosecutors based on the politics of the local county. Because prosecutors are elected, and prosecutors have to deal with police unions, and all of their evidence comes from the same police they're investigating. So, for example, in this last year, we had two cases. We had a case of Eric in the last year and a half. We had Eric Garner in Staten Island, which I talked about, and we had a case of Kai Gurley in Brooklyn. Kai Gurley was killed on the staircase in the housing project in the dark. Policemen shot him. And a local prosecutor, Ken Thompson, good prosecutor, indicted him, and a jury convicted him. Staten Island, Eric Garner, local grand jury led by that prosecutor, no indictment. So let me get this right. A policeman shoots at night in the dark on a stairwell. Indict guilty. Policeman chokes a man to death on tape in broad daylight that says 11 times I can't breathe, no indictment. So there's a clear case of why you need objective outside prosecutorial authorities when it involves police, because it's based on the prosecutor, because the prosecutor decides the grand jury. And I think that is why we have fought to change where we have now in New York, we've got the governor, Andrew Cuomo, I give him credit on that, a special prosecutor on all police matters, something we're trying to do nationally. We've got that done in New York. That's progress. And the present mayor, Bill de Blasio, ran supporting what we said of bringing stop and frisk to an end, which violated the rights of particularly young black males. He ran against a friend of mine, a black candidate, who I had to announce, I'm not going to support my friend because he was for stop and frisk. The fact that de Blasio won fighting stop and frisk showed progress. Change is hard, and change takes time. And I still got some folks mad at me for not supporting Bill de Blasio. I mean, for not supporting Bill Thompson and supporting de Blasio, even though de Blasio has done what he said about stop and frisk in pre-K. But you've got to be willing to take those hits if you really want change.
And I just wanted to ask you about that. The case, New York City is a fascinating case about these issues because it's true, Mayor de Blasio did stop and frisk. And you've kind of heard a continual drumbeat from the right that violence is going up in New York City, crime is going up in New York City. We have statistics that show that's actually wrong. But it's, people were so invested in the idea that stop and frisk was necessary to fight crime.
And crime has not gone up. In fact,
crime
it's gone
has definitely
down.
not gone up. It's gone down.
It's gone down in New York. And the most comical one to me is when I was at University of Florida with former Commissioner Kelly, who was the architect of stop and frisk, and he and I worked together on other things. And he says crime is up higher this year than last year. I said, but de Blasio was mayor last year. That's when he took stop and frisk down. You're comparing him to him.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, it is amazing. But when you look at Donald Trump as the lead Republican candidate, there's a lot of amazing stuff going around.
I mean, just on that point, just on Donald Trump, last week he had a statement about President going to Scalia's, not going to Scalia, one of Justice Scalia's funerals, and made a comment about the mosque. He's obviously the author or lead creator of the whole birther movement. He has been a person who has continually tried to, in essence, delegitimize the president himself. And at the same time, he's obviously creating a lot of disruption in the Republican Party. Where do you see, where do you see him going into the future? Do you think he might, this is just an effort to take over the Republican Party? You've known him.
I think one of the things I think that Trump challenges is that we've got to have a real broad tent progressive movement, because when he attacks Muslims, he's attacking all of us, and we can't be separate from that. I grew up in the aftermath of Dr. King's movement. Y.T. Walker, Reverend Jackson, and others were like the guys that I grew up under. I was, in fact, I was Reverend Jackson and Bill Jones' youth director when I was 13. And so I grew up under the John Lewis, Jesse Jackson generation. I was a generation behind. I remember when in the 90s, as I was older, I was head of the Ministers Division for Rainbow Coalition, and Reverend Jackson and Nancy Ware used to walk me to school, teach me how to know. I'm only teasing because I saw Nancy in the audience. But I grew up believing and I think that rainbow philosophy is more important now than ever because of that. Where I see Trump going, I think the most surprised person in the world on the success of Donald Trump as a political figure is Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump was just doing something for branding and the fact that it caught fire surprised him. I think now his ego and pride is in it. So I think he wants to win the nomination. I'm not sure he really expects to go to the White House. But what I'm afraid of is that he's become the prisoner of this wave that could go all the way if there's not a counter wave.
Yeah.
And the counter wave cannot be to try to match him in personality and flamboyance. It's got to be to really say to American people, wait a minute, this is what we're really facing. And I think if we do that, then people will see him as being basically someone that has really no policies, that really has no answers. That's all over. I mean, he 1 minute almost saying the Affordable Care Act is all right, but another minute, but the president would have went to the funeral if it was a mosque. I mean, he's all over the place. And I think that those that are supporting him, he's playing on their rage and anger, but he's not even telling them, and I'm going to do what about it. And I think it's a dangerous politic, but the ones that will suffer will be the American people, not just the people that vote for him.
We'll go to the audience. I have one last question, which is you've been working for a long time on reforms to the criminal justice system. We see more and more bipartisan support for that. Do you see? Are you optimistic about change there, and then how for us to be able to make change there? And if not, this year, are you optimistic in the year?
The criminal justice bill that has been crafted by Cory Booker and others is a step in the right direction. Would I have wanted to see more in it?
Yeah.
Would I have strengthened it? Yes. But I am one that believes, again, change is hard. You've got to go step by step. And one of the things that I say to people, even that have been critical of President Obama, and there's been things I've disagreed with, and I've communicated that to them, is I remember when David Dinkins was mayor of New York, the only black mayor we had. We beat up on Dinkins so till a lot of people didn't come out and vote because we had like overbeaten on Dinkins. And they didn't come out and vote when his reelection was up in 93. The result is we got Rudy Giuliani. So sometimes you have to push as hard as you can, but take better, because you don't want to end up in an all for nothing, because the nothing will make people suffer a lot more than you do. Many of us will not suffer from the results, but our people will. And I think we've got to be wise enough to be as aggressive as we can, but know when to hold and take that and keep building, rather than say, I'm going to bet the whole farm when you know you don't live on that farm.
Amen. Great. Over there and just on the aisle. And just this gentleman first, and then just give us your name and if you're with somebody.
Sure. Winston Wilkinson. I'm actually a conservative, but a big fan of Reverend Al.
I'm a conservative. I'm trying to conserve the Voting Rights Act, the Affordable Care Act.
Fantastic. Great. Two quick questions. First, Reverend Sharpton, I'll push back a little bit on your implication that the GOP pushback on Obama for the replacement of Scalia is somehow racist. I would say that I would expect if the roles were reversed and you had a liberal who passed away, that I would expect the Democratic Party to fight hard to make sure that a conservative wouldn't replace that liberal. So you can comment on that. And then second, like I said, I'm a big fan and was a fan of yours when I moved to New York in the late 90s, and appreciate your role fighting back against police brutality. One of the things that I enjoyed was when Bloomberg won the election, became mayor, and replaced Giuliani. And although I respect Giuliani and all that he did to clean up New York, I thought that his support of the police in these situations was wrong, and appreciate your pushback against him. But what do you think of Bloomberg as a potential, or at least what will happen if Bloomberg enters the race, and would you be supportive of his actions?
Okay, on the Supreme Court, I think there's a big difference between Democrats fighting to have a liberal jurist, as you say, nominated, and saying, I will not even talk to who the president nominates, and I'm going to filibuster until the next election. if they were just saying they were going to fight to get a conservative jurist, that would be one thing. They're not saying that. They're saying, I don't care who he nominates. I'm hearing this morning that on a short list, there's a Republican former governor. They said, we don't care who it is. I'm not going to talk to them. One senator said, I wouldn't talk to my own daughter if he nominated her. So there's a big difference there. And I said that emanates from the way they've tried to marginalize him based on race throughout. I'm not saying this alone is racist. I'm saying in many ways they've had a racial double standard, in my opinion. And the president probably would disagree with this. But in my opinion, I think a lot of it has been profiling. In terms of Bloomberg, I mean, first of all, you don't know who the nominee will be. I certainly disagreed with him on stop and frisk, but I agreed with Bloomberg on any number of issues, and he was, to me, in many areas better than Giuliani. If Donald Trump is the nominee, I'm open to support anyone, while I'm also reserving my ticket to get out of here if he wins. Only because he'd probably have me deported anyway.
I'd also just say, obviously, Justice Kennedy was confirmed in the last year by a Democratic Senate. Over here, and then on the side, and then we'll go over there. Sure.
Good morning. I'm Alan Abel, writing here for Maclean's Magazine of Canada, but born and raised in Flatbush. At your convention in April, you introduced Dr. Ben Carson by saying, I'm not sure that he and I even agree that today is Wednesday. If it came to it, could you and Donald Trump agree on what day of the week it is, and where could you see your New York values aligning with his?
Well, I think that if I didn't know that Carson and I would agree on the same day, I don't know that Trump and I would agree on the same week. I known Trump 30 years. I met him marching on him because he took ads out on the Central Park 5. I supported the Central Park 5, and I felt his ads were wrong. Later, Don King introduced us, tried to make peace because he wanted Mike Tyson to fight in Atlantic City for Trump, and Tyson and I had worked together. But we never agreed politically. To his credit now, he's always been a right-winger. I do not believe that he is faking that he's a right-winger. I just don't think he has a lot of policies. He knows that I believe what I believe. I do not see any way that we could agree on things. But I think that as New Yorkers, that we could probably have some of the most heated conversations. I don't think he would not talk to people. I just don't think we'd ever like what he had to say.
Over there? Here you.
Reverend Al, my name is William Reed. I'm from the Washington Informer newspaper. But I met you through Barry Burry back years ago at the News Dimension newspaper. You said you went to the White House yesterday. Ray Charles must have been a good concert, but it'll be on tomorrow night.
Right. TV1, 9 o'clock.
Be on PBS too.
It'll be on, but TV, I advertise the Brothers station.
I also know Kathy Hughes and Alfred quite well. But my question is, does the name Simeon Booker ring a bell with you?
Simeon Booker, I grew up reading in Jet magazine.
Could you, when you go to the White House next time, could you make sure that Valerie Jarrett knows who he is, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom should go to Simeon Booker? He's 97 years old.
I think that's a very legitimate request.
I go in the back there. Sure. Way over there.
Hi, I'm Nadia Watson. I'm a correspondent with GVH Live. And I was wondering, why is millennial minority voter turnout so low, and how does this affect their voice in politics?
I think that millennial voting turnout is low because we've not connected the policies to where millennial minority voters understand this is about them. And I've said this to a lot of the young activists in National Action Network, like I told you, most of our chapter leaders are under 40. I've said this to a lot of young activists that have joined the police movement and students, that if you're really concerned about these things, not only do we have to have more protests, which many of them are doing and have really helped change the conversation, we got to translate this into votes. We got to put people in office that are going to do this. The one thing the Tea Party did was translate that into an electoral movement, which literally changed the Congress. So you stopped seeing Tea Party rallies because they started having a Tea Party Congress. And that's what we've got to have the message to millennials, and it has to come from millennials. And I think that that is going to be the challenge this spring and summer. We have our national convention April 13th to the 16th, and we're doing a lot of focus with millennial leadership development on that. In fact, the youth director for National Action Network, who I brought to the White House to the meeting, is only 18. She calls the millennials old. She says, I'm the Z generation. They're the old guard. And we need to wake all of that up, but we need to let them develop their own leadership that will appeal to that. Let's remember, we talk about the old guard in the civil rights movement, and I talk about the guys older than me, but I'm younger than either Democratic candidate. I mean, we are talking about Bernie, who'll be 75, get the youth vote. I mean, we need to develop leadership among young people. I won't be 75 for 15 years. I felt great meeting with Bernie. I felt like a young man again.
We have time for one last question right there.
Thank you. I'm Elizabeth Davis, president of the Washington Teachers Union, and thank you, Reverend Al, for your candor in addressing some of the issues that you've talked about. I want to ask one question about the two Democratic candidates, and it has to do with education because that's what I eat, sleep, and breathe. Here in D.C., we have an achievement gap that has grown from 25 scale points to 55 over the past 8 years, with 2 chancellors, mayoral control, $8 billion, 40 schools closed, and 75% of the teaching force replaced. A lot has factored into that. Privatization. My focus has been on public education in the city and the fact that privatization has had a huge impact on that. Of the 2 presidential candidates, Democrats, which of the 2 has a better track record on public education in your opinion? I have my own, but I'd like to hear yours.
Well, I mean, that could be misinterpreted as me making an endorsement, which I'm not going to do. But I will say that I do not believe that Senator Sanders has voted against public education, and I do not believe that Mrs. Clinton has. So it would be hard for me, without really digging deep into the weeds, to give an opinion on who's better on education. I think that both of them have aligned themselves pretty much with public education and against the privatization of education. This whole, and you went through it in Washington, I know under one administration, this whole move to let's just privatize education or move to a charter kind of obsession and sacrifice the public education of the majority of students is a real threat and has reaped the kind of division that you said, because that didn't just happen to the shift that you talked about. What happened is that we went through a whole matrix of let's just write off most public school kids. We're just going to educate those that are talented. We're going to put them in special schools, and the rest of the kids, we'll just babysit them, and we'll blame the teachers if they don't learn nothing. Even though we're not going to finance the schools, we're not going to give them no computers, we're not give them no books, we're going to blame the teachers. And therefore, we had the parents against the teachers. It's the teachers' fault. The teachers are in horrific conditions that they've got to deal with. And if they complain, we'll even call them bigots. That's the setup. And I think we've got to break that setup.
That's great. Thank you. I know we have limited time. I want to thank you so much for being here, for sharing your thoughts. It's a critical time, and we hope with your comments and the rest that we can build more and more interest in where candidates stand, because obviously we say this every election cycle, but really it will be abundantly clear this cycle. Candidates will be so far different, no matter who they are almost at this point, that the stakes really could not be higher. I want to thank you so much for being here and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.